You are standing on a hilltop / 15,000 years ago. Below you / a river cuts through a valley. Beyond the river, grassland runs to the horizon. There is no fence, no wall, no sign that reads, "You are now entering anything." The ground under your feet belongs to no one. Or maybe it belongs to everyone. / which in practice comes to the same thing. You could walk in any direction for as long as your legs would carry you and never cross a border, never show a document, never be told you do not belong here. For the first 290,000 years of human existence, that was simply the default. No countries, no nations, no borders, land and people on it. Then, somewhere in the last 5,000 years, someone invented an idea so powerful that 8 billion people now organize their entire lives around it, and almost none of them have ever stopped to ask where it came from. So how did humans invent countries? The answer is not simple, and it does not begin where you would expect. It does not begin with a king, or a war, or a map. It begins with a limit inside your skull. Because before humans could build a country, we had to solve a problem that had nothing to do with land at all. A problem about how many people one brain can hold. For most of our history, the answer to "where are you from" was not a place. It was a family. Nook. For roughly 96% of our species' existence, humans lived in small mobile bands. Perhaps 20 to 50 related individuals. No permanent address, no fixed territory. You moved when the food moved. You belonged to a group of people not a patch of ground. And that group held together by something very specific. You knew every single person in it. In 1992, evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar published a paper proposing that the human brain has a ceiling on the number of stable social relationships it can maintain, and that the ceiling sits somewhere around 150. Ooh, I want to be straight with you about this number because a lot of people repeat it as though it were measured with a ruler. It was not. Dunbar derived it by scaling brain size against group size in primates. And the statistical basis has been challenged. A reanalysis in 2021 found the confidence interval so wide that the specific figure of 150 does not really survive. But the underlying principle does, and the principle is what matters here. There is some ceiling. Below it, you can govern by gossip. You know who is related to whom, who owes whom a favor, who is not speaking to whom. Reputation does the work that law does later. Above it, that system fails. You cannot track 300 relationships. You cannot remember every debt and every grudge. And when it fails, you need something else to hold people together. Something bigger than a family tree. Hold on to that because it is the spine of everything that follows. Every country on Earth is far past that ceiling. India has 1.4 billion people. Iceland has 380,000. Even Vatican City has around 800 permanent residents. Not one of them can run on personal relationships. The country is the workaround and we are going to come back at the end to exactly how the workaround functions. Because somebody eventually put it into one phrase. The workaround did not arrive at once. It took thousands of years. And it started with a decision most people would never call political. The decision to stop moving. Around 12,500 years BC in the Levant, a culture we now call the Natufian, did something unusual. They stayed put. Dorothy Garrod first identified them in 1928, working at Shukba Cave. Later excavations at Ain Malahas, led by John Perrault from 1955, revealed circular stone houses / grinding tools, storage pits, and formal cemeteries. These were not seasonal camps. These were villages occupied year-round / by people who had decided that this particular piece of ground was home. Here is the detail that matters. They were still hunter-gatherers. They had not invented farming. They settled down first / and worked out agriculture afterwards, which changes your relationship with the ground beneath you completely. When you are nomadic, land is something you pass through / when you are settled / land is something you invest in / you clear it, you store food on it, you bury your dead in it. And once your ancestors are in the ground, that ground stops being dirt. Archaeologist Colin Renfrew argued in 1973 that the megalithic tombs and monuments scattered across Neolithic Western Europe / were functioning as territorial markers. You put your dead in the earth to say something to everyone else. This land belongs to the people who came from these bones. The first border markers were not fences. They were not graves. That is the first seed of a country, not a law, not an army, a burial. But a burial only binds the people who share those ancestors. It works on a family / a lineage, a village. It does not work on a stranger / and the whole problem / the ceiling problem is a problem about strangers. For that, you needed something a stranger could join. You needed a shared belief. In southeastern Turkey sat a site called Gobekli Tepe. German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt began excavating in 1995 and found something that did not fit the accepted timeline. Massive T-shaped limestone pillars, up to 5.5 meters tall, some weighing 10 tons, carved with animal reliefs and set into circular enclosures. Dated to roughly 9500 BC, 6,000 years before Stonehenge, 7,000 before the pyramids. Schmidt's conclusion, for his death in 2014, became a phrase that rewrote textbooks. First came the temple / then the city. The argument was that people gathered here from scattered bands / built something monumental together, and that the desire to gather is what drove them to settle at all. I have to add something Schmidt did not live to see. Excavations since 2019 have found evidence of domestic structures / and year-round occupation at the site. The clean version / pure sanctuary, no residence, temple before settlement is now contested. It may be that people lived here and worshipped here at the same time. But the part that matters for our story survives either way. Look at what a shared belief does to the ceiling problem. You cannot personally know more than a few hundred people. Can believe in the same thing as 10,000 people you will never meet. Shared belief is the first technology that let humans cooperate past the limit of personal acquaintance. Every country that has ever existed runs on some version of it. At Gobekli Tepe, the shared story was carved into stone. Today, it is printed on a passport. But belief does not feed anyone. For a state, you need grain. Around 10,000 BC / in the Fertile Crescent, humans began domesticating wheat and barley. The genetic study in 1997 traced einkorn wheat back to the slopes of Karakadag in southeastern Turkey, about 30 kilometers from Gobekli Tepe. Agriculture changed everything, and not only because it made more food. James C. Scott / a political scientist at Yale published a book in 2017 called Against the Grain, making an argument most people have never encountered. Scott says, the first states formed specifically around grain / not rice, not yams, not cassava, grain. The reason is almost comically simple. Grain is visible, yet ripens at a predictable time / all at once, standing up in a field. It can be measured / divided, stored, moved, which means it can be the taxed. A yam grows underground. It is invisible. You can leave it in the dirt and dig it up whenever you like. Nobody can count your yams by walking past your field. Scott's claim is that the early state is / at bottom a grain counting operation, and that the walls / the armies, the laws, the borders all exist downstream of the counting. Keep that in mind, because in about 5 minutes we are going to meet the people who did the counting, and what they left behind is not what you would guess. Before any of that / though, there is something that comes first, and it is older than every institution in this video. At Jebel Sahaba in Sudan, a cemetery excavated by Fred Wendorf in the 1960s held 59 skeletons, roughly 13,000 years old. At least 24 showed signs of violent death, with stone projectile points still embedded in the bone. A reanalysis published in 2021 concluded these were not casualties of one battle. They were the residue of repeated conflict between groups over access to the Nile during a long drought. And then there is Nataruk, near Lake Turkana in Kenya / a team led by Marta Mirazon Lar published findings in 2016 / describing 27 individuals, roughly 10,000 years old, lying where they fell on what was then a lakeshore, skulls caved in by blunt force, ribs broken, obsidian blade fragments still lodged in bone. One man's hands appear to have been bound. Men, women, and a woman in the late stages of pregnancy. The interpretation has been debated. Some researchers have questioned whether all the injuries are certainly from violence, and it is worth saying so. But the weight of the evidence points one direction. This was not a duel. It happened on a stretch of shoreline rich in fish and game. And it happened 10,000 years before anyone drew a line on a map / or wrote a treaty, or invented the word border. We tend to tell this story as though borders came first and violence followed, as though the line gets drawn / and then people fight over it. It runs the other way. The violence over territory is older than the idea of territory / everything after this point / the walls / the treaties, the stelae, the sovereignty is machinery humans built on top of something we were already doing. The first response was to build a wall. Around 8000 BC / the settlement at Tel es Sultan, ancient Jericho, built a stone wall about 3.6 meters high and nearly 2 meters thick, with a circular tower 8.5 meters tall / containing an internal staircase of 22 steps. Kathleen Kenyon excavated it in the 1950s and read it as the world's oldest fortification. Others, including Ofer Bar Yosef, have argued it was a flood barrier. Scott offered a third reading. That early city walls were as much about keeping the labor force in as keeping enemies out. Whichever it was, one estimate puts the construction at around 11,000 person days of organized work. Somebody planned it. Somebody directed it. Somebody fed the workers while they built. That is not a family project. That is administration duff. And once you have surplus and walls / you get the thing that follows them everywhere. At Dra, in the Jordan Valley, archaeologists uncovered a granary dating to roughly 9300 BC, built with raised floors to keep out moisture and rodents. Whoever controlled that building controlled the food, and whoever controlled the food controlled everyone. Kent Flannery and Joyce Marcus traced this sequence across many societies. Egalitarian bands, /they showed, /ran on leveling mechanisms, ridicule, gossip, ostracism, /. For tens of thousands of years, if you tried to make yourself chief, your own community would mock you until you stopped. Inequality began when ambitious people found ways around the mocking, usually by claiming a special relationship with the gods, or by controlling the granary. Around 3500 BC in southern Mesopotamia, a settlement called Uruk began growing into something the world had not seen. By roughly 3100 BC, it covered more than 250 hectares and held somewhere in the region of 40,000 people. Robert McCormick Adams surveyed the region and published his findings in Heartland of Cities in 1981. 40,000 people in one place. Sit with that against the ceiling we started with. You cannot govern 40,000 people by gossip. You cannot remember who owes what. You need records, standard measures, a way to know what came in and what went out. So here are the people who did the counting. The earliest written documents we have are proto-cuneiform tablets from Uruk, dating to roughly 3400 to 3200 BC. Over 5,000 have been recovered. More than 85% of them are administrative records / grain distributions, worker ration lists, livestock inventories. Writing was not invented for poetry, or prayer, or philosophy. It was invented for bookkeeping. Denise Schmant-Besserat traced the whole system back to small clay tokens used for counting goods, as early as 8000 BC. Tokens became impressions. Impressions became signs. The first written word was almost certainly not God, or love, or war. It was probably a number next to a picture of a bag of barley. And alongside the tablets, Uruk mass-produced something called the beveled rim bowl. Crude / undecorated, roughly identical in size, found in enormous quantities. The leading interpretation is that these were standardized ration containers. The same bowl, the same measure of grain, handed out day after day. That is not hospitality. That is a payroll. Picture the person holding the stylus. Somebody sat in a room in Uruk 5,000 years ago pressing wedges into wet clay, recording how much barley went to how many workers. They were not trying to invent civilization. They were trying not to lose count. The country was built on paperwork. With bureaucracy came the first borders we can actually read. Around 2500 BC, two Sumerian city-states, Lagash and Umma, fought over a strip of fertile land called the Guadina. King Mesalim of Kish arbitrated surveyed the boundary and set up an inscribed stone to mark it. When Umma later crossed it, King Eannatum of Lagash defeated them and erected the Stele of the Vultures around 2450 BC. Soldiers marching in formation. Vultures carrying off the body parts of the dead. The inscription records the re-establishment of the boundary and divine curses on anyone who violates it. That stele, found in 1881 and now in the Louvre, is among the oldest surviving records of a formal political border. Two polities, one line. An argument about where one ends and the other begins, backed by a threat. In Egypt, the Narmer palette, uncovered in 1898 and dated to roughly 3100 BC, shows a king wearing the crowns of both Upper and Lower Egypt. One ruler, two lands, joined into a single political unit. That is the outline of a country, and it was made the way a great many countries have been made since, by force. But it is worth stopping here, because not every early civilization did it this way. In the Indus Valley, between roughly 2600 and 1900 BC, a civilization emerged across an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Combined cities laid out on precise grids, bricks standardized across sites more than 1,000 kilometers apart, all following the same 1:2 to 4 ratio, standardized weights, sophisticated drainage, a script we still cannot read, and almost no evidence of palaces, royal tombs, autocratic kings, no colossal statues of rulers, no triumphal images of armies. Gregory Possehl made this argument in 2002, and Jonathan Mark Kenoyer has proposed that the Indus may have worked as a kind of confederation, held together by merchant networks and shared standards, rather than by a throne and a garrison. The debate is far from settled. But if there is anything to it, the Indus Valley tells us something important. A country does not have to begin with a conqueror. Facts. It can begin with a system of weights and measures, and a general agreement that everybody uses the same size brick, which is, when you think about it, a social contract written in clay. Empires and kingdoms and confederations, though, are still not countries, in the sense you mean when you say the word. A modern country needs one more ingredient that none of these had. It needs ordinary people, not just rulers, to feel they belong to the same thing. The legal historian Henry Maine described the underlying shift back in 1861. Human society moving from organization by status, meaning who you are related to, to organization by contract, meaning where you live and what you owe. For most of history, you belong to a lineage. A country asks you to belong to a territory. Instead, the date usually given for the modern system is the 24th of October 1648, the Peace of Westphalia. Two treaties signed at Munster and Osnabrück ending the 30 Years' War. And, so the story goes, establishing that each state has authority over its own internal affairs. Here is the complication, and I think it is the most interesting thing in this section. Historians have spent decades pointing out that the treaties do not actually say most of what we credit them with. The idea of Westphalian sovereignty was largely assembled afterwards, by later writers who needed an origin point, which means one of the founding stories of the modern country is itself a story we made up about ourselves. Keep that in your pocket for about 90 seconds. Because Westphalia gave us a legal framework. It did not give anybody a feeling. In 1983, Benedict Anderson published Imagined Communities and gave the feeling a name. A nation, he wrote, is an imagined community, because the members of even the smallest nation will never know most of their fellow members. Yet in the mind of each lives the image of their communion. You will never meet 99.99% of your fellow citizens. You share no personal bond with them. You probably disagree with most of them about most things. And yet you feel somehow that you and they are part of the same story. Now put that phrase next to the thing we left at the 4-minute mark. The ceiling. The claim that one human being can hold only so many relationships in their head. An imagined community is that ceiling / worked around. Not raised. Not removed. Circumvented hacks. You still cannot know 150 million people. What you can do is carry a picture in your head of a community you belong to, and then behave as though the picture is real. And everything in this video is equipment for holding that picture steady. The graves that said / our ancestors are in this ground. The temple that said / we worship the same thing. The granary, the wall, the tablet, the ration bowl, the boundary steel, the crown, the flag, the anthem, the passport. Not one of those objects is a country. All of them together are a machine for feeling related to the strangers. Ernest Gellner / writing the same year put the sharp end on it. Nationalism does not awaken nations that were sleeping. Nationalism invents them. When Italy unified in 1861, only a small minority of the population spoke Standard Italian. Estimates range from about 2.5% to 10%. The rest spoke Sicilian, Neapolitan, Venetian, Piedmontese, dozens of tongues that could not understand each other. A man could stand in the New Italy, hear the new anthem, and not know what the words meant. Massimo d'Azeglio is supposed to have said, "We have made Italy. Now we must make Italians." The country came first. The people it claimed to represent came afterwards. And sometimes the line was drawn by people who had never been there. On the 16th of May 1916, Mark Sykes and François-Georges Picot divided the Arab provinces of the Ottoman Empire into British and French zones. Those lines had almost nothing to do with anyone living inside them. They became the borders of Iraq / Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. In 1884, at a conference in Berlin, representatives of 14 European states divided Africa among themselves. No African rulers were present. By 1914, roughly 90% of the continent was under European control, cut into territories that split peoples in half and forced rivals into single administrative units. When independence came, most of those countries kept the colonial borders. The Organization of African Unity formally resolved to do so in 1964, on the reasoning that reopening the question would start something nobody could stop. In 1945, the United Nations had 51 members. Today, it has 193. The newest widely recognized country, South Sudan, is younger than the smartphone. We have not finished inventing countries. We may never finish. In March of 1882, the French philosopher Ernest Renan gave a lecture at the Sorbonne titled, "What is a Nation?" He worked through race / language, religion, geography, and dismissed all of them. His answer was that a nation's existence is a daily plebiscite. It exists because the people inside it choose every day to go on acting as if it exists. It is not held together by soil or blood. It is held together by agreement, by shared memory, and, Renan added, by shared forgetting, he said, is essential to the making of a nation. You have to let go of the conquests and the civil wars that produce the borders you live inside, or the agreement comes apart. Tonight you will go home to a country. You probably will not think about it. But that country / whatever it is younger than pottery, younger than agriculture, younger than the dog asleep on your sofa. For 98% of human history, it did not exist. It exists now because someone grew a field of wheat. Someone counted the harvest. Someone built a wall around it. And someone convinced the people inside that wall / that they were all the same kind of people. That is what a country is. A story that enough people believed for long enough that the believing became the thing itself.